The ground in Manchester didn't just shake from the weight of thousands of boots this weekend, it trembled with the collective heartbreak of a nation that no longer recognises its own city centres. While the Prince of Darkness and the establishment elite play a game of sleaze on steroids in Westminster, the streets of the North became a theatre of physical discord. Thousands of patriots gathered to fly the Union Jack in a peaceful remigration march, only to be met by a wall of masked radical factions and the hollow thud of a fist hitting home. This isn't just a rally, it is a visible internal fracture. Why is the government rewarding institutional failure with knighthoods, while the people who built this country are treated like suspects in their own streets? Today, we are exposing the shadow play that allows the state to monitor your tweets while ignoring the ideological rot tearing our communities apart.
The scenes in Manchester were a masterclass in societal friction. At 9:33 a.m, the streets belonged to the British nationalist, a sea of Union Jacks, and a demand for national sovereignty. But as the march moved toward the city centre, the managed decline of public order became absolute. Masked groups, characterised by what many call the SSRI stare, launched a coordinated offensive to block the route. The nail in this narrative is the sovereign paradox. In any other country, flying the national flag is a sign of unity. In the UK, the establishment has politicised the fabric to ensure it looks like a crime. While Jeremy Corbyn and the shadow architects looked on, the streets descended into a security standoff that left 9 people in custody and the public's trust at an all-time low.
To understand the anger, you have to look at the institutional betrayal. We are living in a time where the state rewards mediocrity and failure with titles, knighting mayors who preside over decline and managers who preside over loss. It is a categorical inversion of British values. While the elite celebrate their Sir titles, the Patriots of the North are dealing with a 340% surge in sharp instrument offences and a housing strategy that prioritises the unvetted arrival over the British veteran. This isn't an accident, it is a tactical erasure of the working class. When a council leader tells the public to send a clear message to peaceful protesters, they aren't building cohesion, they are incentivising the friction.
The Manchester clash isn't an isolated incident, it is a European pattern. We've seen the ideological rot claim lives in France with the tragic murder of students like Quinton, yet the BBC and the establishment mouthpiece continue to label any defence of the country as thuggery. The Prince of Darkness in Downing Street remains ideologically tethered to a legal framework that makes sovereign action impossible. They would rather let garrison towns burn than admit that their remigration fears are becoming a mainstream reality. The maths of the mud has moved to the maths of the pavement, and the numbers are no longer adding up for the Starmer administration.
The red smoke in Manchester has cleared, but the national discontent is now a permanent feature of the landscape. We are witnessing a deadlock between a shadow elite that thinks everything has a price and a sovereign patriot who knows that some things are not for sale. The government can issue dispersal orders and they can liquidate the relationships of anyone who speaks out, but they cannot delete the feeling of a nation waking up. The curiosity of the viewer shouldn't be about whether the arrests will stop, but whether there is anything left of the social contract to save. The last orders for the old guard have been called. The question is, whose streets will they be tomorrow?
You should be here standing with us!
The British government has just done the unthinkable. It has pushed aside 1.33 million citizens waiting for social housing and moved to prioritise illegal migrants for brand new council homes. There was no warning, no national debate, no attempt to justify why those who have contributed nothing to Britain should leap ahead of those who have waited years. The announcement landed like a political explosion, not whispered, not disguised, but presented as policy, and the nation erupted. The question now gripping the nation is brutally simple. How did we get here?
In Ashfield alone, we've got about 7,000 people on the council house waiting list. It's been like that for many, many years. And to suggest that asylum seekers, and let's be honest, a lot of these aren't genuine asylum seekers, they're illegal migrants crossing the channel and getting loads and loads of freebies in our country. To suggest, though, that these are going to go to the top of the queue above the residents, the born and bred Ashfield residents in my constituency, is absolutely disgusting.
It began with an unassuming policy update pushed out of Whitehall. 5 local authorities had volunteered for a new pilot scheme to house asylum seekers directly in council homes. The stated aim was to reduce the reliance on hotels. But within minutes of the announcement, the political temperature shifted. In Ashfield, in Brighton, in Hackney, in Peterborough, and deep into rural Wales, councillors were blindsided. Emails, messages and calls flooded in, each one sharpened by disbelief. Reform MP Lee Anderson gave voice to what millions were already thinking when he labelled the plan disgusting. His district alone has 7,000 residents waiting for housing, many for years. Veterans, pensioners, disabled residents, young families hanging on with rising rents, all facing the prospect of being overtaken by individuals who arrived illegally by boat. And the shockwaves didn't stop there. A councillor in Powys revealed her area had nearly 4,000 people waiting on the social housing list, some for almost 3 years. Yet no one had been told that newly built homes might bypass them entirely. In communities where local surgeries have shut down, where schools are closing, and where there is no general hospital, the idea of adding more demand to a collapsing system feels like lighting a match beside dry grass.
The backlash was immediate and unfiltered. Keir Starmer's government, already weakened by plummeting approval ratings, watched as frustration turned into fury. Social media erupted, local forums exploded, radio phone-ins became battlegrounds of anger as callers questioned how their own government could justify such a move. People in London expressed disbelief that asylum seekers were being placed in accommodation the average resident cannot even dream of affording. Others pointed to Glasgow, already labelled Europe's asylum seeker capital, warning that this policy could turn their towns into the next hotspot. One councillor bluntly warned that people smugglers would now advertise Britain as the land where a free house awaits you. This is political TNT, landing just months before the May local elections, and every opposition strategist knows the line that will appear on leaflets: vote Labour, lose your council home.
To understand the scale of the outrage, you must understand the state of the country. Britain is already gripped by a housing emergency. NHS waiting lists have ballooned, homelessness is rising sharply, and immigration remains one of the most divisive issues in the national debate. Anti-immigration protests spread across the UK through 2025, fueled by the sense that the system is not only overwhelmed, but fundamentally unfair. Despite repeated promises to restore order and take control, the government has struggled to contain small boat crossings. Costs for migrant hotels continue to escalate. Enforcement bodies are stretched to capacity. And while ministers emphasise new asylum reforms, Britons feel they are witnessing a government drifting rather than governing. This is the context in which the council housing announcement landed, not in a moment of stability, but in a moment where every fracture is already visible. The consequences for the government could be seismic. Starmer's promise of grown-up politics now rings hollow for many voters who believe the system favours those arriving illegally over those who have contributed to the country for generations. Local councils feel abandoned, communities feel unheard, and even moderate voices warn that dispersing asylum seekers across council homes will make oversight extremely difficult. Hotels, for all their flaws, kept people in one place. Council homes scatter them across towns and estates, making monitoring nearly impossible. This is not just a housing policy, it is a security vulnerability, and it is a political liability of extraordinary scale.
Britain's political calendar is unforgiving. Local elections are only months away. Every party now sees an opportunity or a threat. For the government, this is a nightmare that will follow them everywhere, every doorstep, every debate, every interview. For their opponents, it is a perfect storm. A government struggling with borders, failing on housing, and now pushing a policy that places asylum seekers ahead of citizens. The narrative almost writes itself. A government out of touch, prioritizing outsiders over its own electorate and destabilizing already fragile communities. It is the kind of story that cuts across class, region, and ideology. Everyone knows someone on a housing list. Everyone feels the pressure on public services. Everyone senses the imbalance. This is why the anger will not fade, because people are not simply reacting to a policy, they are reacting to a pattern.
This crisis exposes a deeper reality. Britain has been heading towards this moment for years. Housing shortages, slow asylum processing, and years of underinvestment created the perfect storm, and this policy is simply where it all erupts. The backlash isn't just about migrants getting homes, it's about communities already stripped of services now being asked to absorb even more pressure. In places that have lost hospitals, GP access, youth centres and public travelled, the message feels brutally clear. Their needs remain secondary. That sense of abandonment is what turns frustration into political anger. The government argues the plan saves money compared to hotels, but that misses the point. Housing is emotional terrain, stability, fairness, belonging. When people waiting years see newcomers appear to jump the queue, no amount of fiscal logic can override the feeling of injustice. And that is the real danger. The government treated a housing crisis as a bureaucratic issue, when it is actually a cultural and political fault line. This isn't just one bad decision. It taps into a deeper belief that the system no longer works for ordinary Britons. That is why the reaction is so fierce. It's not about a pilot scheme. It's about trust and who the state chooses to stand with.
The country stands in disbelief and rising anxiety. A government insists it is acting responsibly. Millions insist they have been pushed aside. And somewhere between those two positions lies the truth of a nation wrestling with fairness, identity, and trust. This story will not quietly disappear. It will define the coming months. It may define the next election. And the question echoing across the country is the one the government cannot escape. If this is what fairness looks like, what happens next?
To 500,000 foreign nationals who can prove they have no criminal record and have lived in Spain for at least 5 months before the start of 2026. The legal status will give the migrants the ability to legally work and 1-year residency permit, which could be extended.
Spain has announced it will grant legal residency to 500,000 undocumented migrants, and the impact could be.
History often repeats itself, but rarely with this much warning. In 2015, Angela Merkel's welcome policy changed the face of Europe forever, triggering a movement of 1.3 million people. Today, in Madrid, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez has just hit the reset button on European borders. By granting legal status to 500,000 undocumented migrants, he hasn't just changed the law in Spain. He has set off a geopolitical chain reaction that leads directly to the White Cliffs of Dover. As a massive human caravan begins its journey from Africa toward the southern shores of Europe, the question in Westminster is no longer if they are coming, but how many will end up in a dinghy in Calais. Is Keir Starmer prepared for a Spanish armada of unregulated arrivals? The decision by the socialist government in Spain is being hailed by liberals as a move of dignity and justice. But for those tasked with European security, it is a nightmare. Sánchez argues that an aging population needs these workers, but the reality on the ground is different. Spain suffers from record youth unemployment. There is little work to be found. Experts argue that this amnesty acts as a massive pull factor, signalling to mainland Africa that the gates are open. We are already seeing the footage, thousands queuing outside consulates, and a caravan of people moving towards population centres. But for most, Spain is just the gateway. The real destination is the rich north, the industrialised economies of Germany, France, and ultimately the UK. For Prime Minister Keir Starmer, this news couldn't come at a worse time. His inbox is already overflowing with a cost of living crisis, backbench rebellions, and the high-profile fallout of figures like Peter Mandelson letting the country down. Starmer's Greenland and cost of living interventions are being constantly derailed by the reality of the Channel. If the 2015 Syrian crisis caused a schism in European politics that never fully healed, this new influx could be the star moulder, the event that melts down the Labour government's attempt to project a stable border policy. Critics warn that the UK is still seen as the soft option, and 500,000 newly legalised Europeans will only increase the pressure on the northern French coast as spring approaches.
Beyond the economics lies the question of security. Data from Spain shows a staggering disparity. While migrants make up 14% of the population, they are allegedly linked to 30% of the crime. This security paradox is what haunts the northern nations. As freedom of movement allows these individuals to shift across the continent, the vetting process becomes a game of shadows. When a nation grants amnesty to 500,000 people at once, can they truly know who is entering the system? It is a gamble with the social fabric of the entire continent, and the UK sits at the very end of that chain.
Pedro Sanchez says he is choosing the path of empathy, but in the cold reality of geopolitics, one nation's empathy is another nation's emergency. The Spanish Armada of 2024 isn't coming with ships of war, it's coming with the momentum of a policy shift that cannot be undone. Keir Starmer is waiting for a big moment to save his premiership, but the moment arriving on the horizon is one he didn't plan for. The breaking point Nigel Farage warned about years ago is being tested once again. The caravan is moving, the amnesty is signed, and the Channel is waiting. The silence from Downing Street is the sound of a government realization. You can control the narrative, but you cannot control the tide.